Good morning, everyone who is, or afternoon, wherever you may be, coming to the webinar here. We'll give everyone just a couple of minutes as we get set up. Excited to have you all with us, excited to have Art with us, and it's gonna be a good day. So I'll go ahead and get my screen share here ready. All right. Art, did I do the right screen there? Just want to make sure it's the review and
that's good.
And the session.
Yep.
Great. I will give it one more minute and we'll get started from there. All right, well, I'll give you the official welcome here. Welcome to this edition of the Scaling Pre-Sales webinar series from Consensus. My name is Garrett Erickson. I'll be hosting you guys today for working seamlessly as a sales team with Art Fromm. Wanted to remind you guys that Consensus is sponsoring this webinar series. For those of you who may not know what Consensus is, we are an intelligent demo automation software company based here in Utah in the US that helps you scale pre-sales. Using Consensus, your sales engineering team and other pre-sales professionals build a library of reusable interactive video demos that sales sends out on demand. Consensus automatically personalizes the experience and tracks engagement, bringing prospects to live demos better educated and ready to talk specifics. This reduces unqualified demos to near zero and can double your SE team's productivity. You can go to goconsensus.com to see a demo for yourself. There's also a 2-question survey at the end of this if you're interested in demo automation to answer, and we'll get you in touch with someone who can give you that kind of information. By way of housekeeping, before I introduce Art, can I have a few people raise their hands just to show that that we're good? Okay, got a few. All right, let's all have you put your hands down. Thank you so much. There will be some Q&A. So at the end of this, if you have questions, or during this, if you have any questions, load them in and Art will answer them. Chat's also available. So Art will be monitoring the chat and probably answer some questions there as they come up. And now to introduce our speaker, Art Fromm is the founder and owner of Team Sales Development, Inc., specializing in consultative sales transformation for B2B companies. Art brings with him a pretty unique perspective as he's been an end user customer for software, as well as an SE, an account manager, and a sales leader. So we're really excited to have him with us. He started his own company in 2004, focusing on sales enablement. And he has been doing training for a long time in this space with some of the greats like John Kerr, Peter Cohan, and also with Steve Bistritz. Apologies there. So without further ado, I will stop my share and you can take it away, Art.
Thanks, Garrett. I appreciate that. And welcome everybody that's live or listening to the recording. Such an honor to be with you here today. And my goal really in our short time together is to just share some ideas about the overall sales team and what it is that each part of the sales team does, and also those that we are interacting with in the customer environment or the buyer. This is a perspective that I think is unique because, sales teams in particular, the sales reps often get sales training that's very focused on things like qualifying and quota and closing and all that. And that's fine and important, certainly. Unfortunately, SEs and pre-sales don't always get the same type of process training and things like that. Although sometimes companies sort of what we call flea dip the SEs into the sales training to give them a little flavor of it, which I think is helpful because it does help you to be somewhat on the same page. But what we found is that oftentimes the SEs are left wanting for more. So my goal today really is just to try to expose both any sales reps that are listening, watching, SEs and pre-sales that are watching, and sales enablement to the overall process, and then what are the ways that we can work together better. So let me start. Sharing here. And just to make sure, Garrett, can you see my cursor there in the upper left?
Yes, sir, I can see it.
And in the lower right?
Yes.
All right, awesome. So working seamlessly as a sales team, what is it really all about? Well, we have heard from others a number of things. Before I share that with you, in the chat, I would just like to know what is, and I'm going to put something in the chat here for you. What is your role in the sales process? What's your job title, your function? SE, AM, any variations of those, sales enablement, other. All right, so we've got a lot of SEs, pre-sales, different variations of it, solution consultant. I see some account managers as well, proposal managers, solution consulting, BODs. So we've got an enablement. All right, excellent. So for each of your perspectives, as we go through this, you can identify with various aspects of it. And I invite your comments in the chat as we go along here, if you'd like. So what we've heard from others in terms of the idea about working together as a sales team includes some of the following. So for pre-sales or SEs, sometimes frustrated with sales or the account managers, not getting enough information to do a proper technical proof, or involvement at the last minute, or involvement in a way that's not necessarily appropriate, or lack of involvement at all in terms of understanding what's going on. So for those of you that are in pre-sales, anything else you want to add there as far as some other SE, any other SE frustrations that you'd like to add onto that? Some of the things that you've experienced, feel free to do that. And one thing that's interesting is that as I've delivered workshops for John Care and as a certified great demo affiliate and in my sales trainings, whenever I have SEs or a primary SE audience, it's always interesting to me to find out what point at which they start to say, hey, this training that you're doing for us as SEs, our sales people need this because they need to know what we need to know. They need to know what we need to do our job. And we don't seem to be getting that from them. So can you please train them at least on an awareness of what it is that we are doing, or better yet, train them how to do some of this stuff. And that oftentimes leads to team training, which is one of the things that I do quite a bit of. So just looking through all of these various lack of qualification, not properly qualified, no discovery, lack of product knowledge, poor discovery, visibility of proof of concept, demo left to the end of the meeting, reworking, doing things over again, no value. So we start to see here a trend and a pattern. And unfortunately, this isn't done on purpose oftentimes. This is just part of the way things go. And what we're hoping to do today is get some insight into that, how to make that better. For those of you that are the salesperson in the group, here are some things that we've heard regarding frustrations with the SE. And again, in the chat, I've put AM there if you want to add anything else from your perspective. So things like, just do the demo. This is what the prospect is asking for. They want to see the product, just show the product. Why do you need to know additional information? You should be able to figure out what to do. Or sometimes I know even as I've been an SE in my career, and perhaps I have to admit sometimes when I'm an AM, I might get a little bit nervous about the SE sort of knows everything. And the SE or pre-sales may tell the truth. Or sometimes we may go on and on because we love our stuff so much. and that can be frustrating to the salesperson. So other ideas there, and feel free to put it to all attendees so everybody can see your responses, or you could just send it to us as panelists. So delays in getting demos. Yep. SEs are very busy resources. Unwavering honesty. Yep. The need to just continue to move through the process. Not a lot of time to be able to spend on that part of it. All right. Focus on features rather than value. So not the right messaging. Okay. Trying to do too much in too little amount of time. Understood. All right. So there's a variety of things from a account manager perspective that likewise is frustrating about the SE or pre-sales role. Only 36 hours of the day, exactly. SEs being involved with pricing, which is not appropriate. And that's part of what we're going to talk about, is who's doing what in this process. And then, of course, unfortunately, this winds up with frustrations for the customer. And I'll just put in the chat here so you can start to add your thoughts about what might be frustrating from a customer perspective when the sales team isn't firing on all cylinders. Some things like it feels pushy. It feels like we are being pushed into this. It feels like, as we say in Great Demo, a show up and throw up or a harbor tour. It feels like we're being given a bunch of stuff that's not necessarily relevant. They didn't listen. The sales team didn't listen. They were disorganized. I got asked the same questions by 5 different people, or I didn't get asked any questions at all. And therefore, I'm wondering if they know what I'm really trying to do. The sales team wasn't helpful to me. It seemed like they were more interested in the sale than they were in me as the buyer. And just looking through some of the responses here, not tailored to my needs, not like I was heard, not listening. So listening seems to be a common theme here as far as the things that are not being done by the team. And of course, that could be just each of us in our individual roles interacting with them, or it could be as a result of us focusing so much on what we're trying to get done. So the bottom line up front, and again, others are putting in here, doesn't understand business needs, doesn't show the value, not connecting to the things that we need to see, looks like a bunch of features and functions to me. Right. So these are the things that as a sales team, we can take to heart and really think about how can we turn that around. And, you know, consensus and what Garen's doing in terms of the things regarding focused on the sales team, looking at the buying process and understand from the buyer's perspective what's really going on. So we'll take a look at that today as well. So if we take a look at the bottom line up front, as we like to do in mastering technical sales, in Great Demo, and a variety of the things that we teach, the bottom line up front here is that as an SE, what we really want is to use our time effectively. We want to be able to make sure that we have precious amount of time. We saw it in the chat. You know, there's only a certain number of hours in the day, and we all don't have extra time on our hands. So how can we be used as an SE, for those of you that are SEs, as a resource? And by the way, from here on, just to make it simple, I'm going to generalize pre-sales into SE, and I'm going to generalize sales into the AM. And I realize there's a variety of different roles, as we saw, and it covers a variety of different aspects in the sales process, but we're just going to say SE and AM to make it easy for ourselves here. Also, moving the deal forward, of course, as SEs, that's our job. It's not just about doing great demos. It's not about making sure that we are delivering information. It's about connecting the information so that we increase the probability of winning. As an SE, we are not necessarily responsible for the actual close of the deal. We'll talk about that more in a few minutes. What we are responsible for is increasing the probability of winning the deal. And we want to do that in an efficient way. In Great Demo, we talk about the ability to compress the demo down to the things that are needed. And that relies on us as SEs knowing exactly what it is that the customer wants, and therefore understanding through discovery. As an account manager in the sales role, for all of you, what you want is, of course, to win more deals, but not at the expense of burning out your SE, and not at the expense of just trying to make it a numbers game. Now, I know, you know, on this call, and those of you in the recordings, we have a variety of different type of environments and different types of sales, everything from complex enterprise B2B sales, B2B sales that are more of a commercial nature, or maybe you're a territory rep, or maybe you're a BDR or a CSR who are doing the initial sales call at the beginning, handling the leads and all that. But overall, the goal of the sales role, of course, is to win more deals. And we don't want to just try to push more in the top of the funnel just to squeeze a couple things out the bottom. We really want to win more deals in a way that's more efficient. And of course, have happier and repeat customers and renewals. So the idea here, depending on what type of business you're in, if it's a SaaS business, we need to have happy customers so we can get the renewals. If you're in more of a hardware or other type of business where it's more of a you deliver it and then they take and run with it, we want to make sure that they're going to be successful at it. So as a salesperson, that's really what the goal is. And of course, as a team, what we want to do is make sure that we can leverage the strengths of each other. So SEs and AMs are wired differently. I could do a whole webinar just on that. We'll touch on pieces of that today. But the point is that there's a distinct role for each of us. And while we are sort of in those swim lanes, we need that healthy overlap. Understanding what each is doing so we can contribute together for what it is that we're working on together. And then, of course, as on that point, working together to persuade the customer or prospect to buy. One of the biggest things that we want to be doing as a team, and one of the biggest jobs of sales, is persuading, getting somebody to think a little bit differently or getting them to move forward in a way that's perhaps not so comfortable for them. They have comfort where they're at. They have comfort in their do nothing. And our job is to help them to move them off of that in a way that's constructive. So this is, again, where the buyer perspective comes in and is so important. Yep, and so I'm getting some comments in here. Definitely, I agree. As an SE, we want to provide the best and most valuable solution. Absolutely, and that's all part of this, which we'll talk about. The ultimate goal is toward the goal of that is to help us to move the deal forward. And we won't do that if we don't deliver that best and most valuable solution. So speaking of that, let's just start with the end in mind for a moment and think about when it comes to each of us in our role on the sales team and in whatever way you're compensated. For sales, obviously, it's taking down quota, increasing win rate, getting revenue and all that. For SEs, you may have a variable part of your compensation that is involving the revenue and other things. But the bottom line is together, all of us, is that we want to make sure that we're moving the deal forward. So what does that really look like if we can start with the end in mind for what seamless sales would look like? So the very last thing that happens, the goal that we all have in mind here, is that we want the customer to be satisfied. And that can lead to recurring revenue, whether it be maintenance revenue, additional sales, SaaS licenses, other things like that. This is the goal that all of us have, and sales enablement too, in terms of sales enablement helping this to happen, or revenue enablement, as we've heard recently as well. Now, in order for that to happen, just prior to that, we need to make a sale or a purchase order. We're going to talk about who's responsible for each part of these and why that's important as we go through this. In order to make the sale or to receive that purchase order, we need to help the customer or prospect decide to purchase the solution. This is where the influence comes in. And one big, huge part of the influence that's required is the SE delivering the technical proof. So to the point that was just made to us in the Q&A, it is about the SE delivering specific capabilities that address the business issues and the business needs that the customer has. It's not just about doing a fantastic demo. How many times, as SE, do I remember coming out of a demo, we were high-fiving each other like, oh, we did a great job delivering that. And then nothing ever happened, right? So it's about delivering a technical proof that leads to the purchase decision. And before that, in order to know what to show, we have to know as a team what it is that's going on. So this is all about discovery, determining the needs and the outcomes desired for the customer. And of course, that means that we've entered into, and notice we're working backwards here, obviously, that the deal was qualified at some point. So before we really start getting into the deeper discovery, qualifying that the deal is worth pursuing. And prior to that, and this should cover everybody on the call at this point, is the lead is generated or received. So whether you are a BDR or CSR that are on the very front end, an AM or AE or sales rep that's driving the deal, an SE, a SA, a SC, or whatever acronym you want to use that's delivering the technical proof, or the customer success person that's making sure that what we are delivering is what the customer really wants and that they're going to use. All of us should have all of this in mind. It's very, very easy for us to sort of focus on just what we're doing and have that tunnel vision around what it is that our immediate goal is. What I want to bring is more of a context of what it is that we're doing here. So with this in mind, let's talk briefly about some of the roles in the buying process. And let's just do a quick brainstorm here. I'm typing something in the chat. I can't type and talk. Any of you that have been in my workshops know that I can't type and talk at the same time. So I'm going to type something in the chat for everybody to help with. So roles in the buying process. What in your experience, and maybe you could just think about those that you directly are engaged with, think about who you are engaged with in your own role. What are some of the roles in the buying process? And this could be job titles, or it could be buying roles, like the function that somebody would have in the process of interacting with you. So think about your counterparts, the people that you're working with. Go ahead and put in the chat, who are some of the people that you are interacting with on a daily basis, with the different type of roles that you're involved with. All right, so it could be an implementation engineer, IT, technical people, C-suite, principal architects, developers, procurement. Yep, that's a big part of it as well. That's a topic for a whole nother webinar at some point. Ops engineer, business users, decision makers. Yeah, security, privacy, networking. All right, infrastructure, finance, IT, head of the department. So a whole variety of different types of job functions, technical buyers, economic buyers, we can see across the whole spectrum here. So let's just define for a moment what, from a buying perspective, are some of the roles so that we can talk about our interactions, and as a team, what are we doing? And then specifically in the SE type role and in the sales type role or the AM type role, what are the ways that we can work together to make that function better? Problem seekers, I love it. All right. So for business stakeholders, think of this as sort of the highest level of the pyramid, those that are more likely in some more senior positions, not always, but typically. We have a couple different type of roles in the buying process. The one that's very important, the approver, and somebody mentioned procurement earlier, that very often could be the approver. So the approver, if you're taking notes, is the one that really is signing off on this. They have the money, the budget. They're the one that are agreeing that this is something that's worth putting the time into, and they will sign off or allocate the resources, funds, or the time that's needed, depending on what the nature of the project is. Another type of business stakeholder that we will interact with and know about is the business decision maker. Now, this could be one person or it could be a committee, but the point is these are the people that are really deciding, is this solution going to deliver the value that we want? The approver is more about the money, and very often the way that this works is that the business decision maker is ultimately going to wind up influencing the approver. So the idea is if the approver has the money and the business decision maker is the one that knows if the solution is going to work, the business decision maker is going to convince the approver to free up the money to fund the project or the time or the people or resources. Now, occasionally, depending on the size of the project or customer you're working with, these two may be one and the same. Sometimes this appears in the form of somebody who has a budget. So somebody who has a budget could wind up, spending that. They can approve the use of their own budget. Very often, and one of the reasons why in a sales methodology that I teach called Sales Opportunity Snapshot, we don't talk about budget per se, because the business decision maker may have a need that needs to go get some funding. There may not actually be a budget, and they want to go and talk with finance or other people, as some of you have mentioned already here, that could carve out some money, use it from another project, and implement it toward the project that you're proposing for the sale that you want to make. A very, very important part of this, and this also comes from the Sales Opportunity Snapshot workshop that I deliver, and this is probably one of the key golden takeaways for today, is The relevant executive, the person that has the most to gain or to lose as a result of the sale. They are a special type of business decision maker because being that they have the most to gain or to lose, what do you think? If they have the relevant executive, I'll just put it in this way. The relevant executive, if they have the most to gain or to lose, why is that a really key role that we want to uncover? Go ahead and put in the chat your ideas. What would they be doing for us? How would they be able to help us? They have the most to gain or to lose as a result of implementing the solution. So what ways can they be used in this process? Go ahead and put it in the chat. Advocate, absolutely. An influencer, for sure, a very heavy influencer. Champion, absolutely. Skin in the game. Yes, they have skin in the game. They are the one that's affected by this. Think about this for a second. The approver, the one that's actually allocating the money, they want to make sure they make the right decision. So they're going to rely on the business decision maker, but they aren't the one that's necessarily going to live with if this solution is going to deliver what it's supposed to deliver. An unblocker. I love it. I love that, Anya. That's really great, because somebody else said that they deal with blockers earlier. An unblocker. They can help redirect the budget. So once again, the business decision maker very often can be the relevant executive. Sometimes they are, sometimes it's a separate person. But once again, they have high influence and very, very important for us from a business stakeholder. And as you can already tell, stakeholder, by that we mean somebody who has a stake in the decision process. And I'm generalizing these things. There's a lot more to come on this, but these are the general high-level pieces that we need for today to get the main points. From a technical perspective, there are also then technical stakeholders, distinctly different roles. And this is where some of the other job titles that came up would be involved, such as more of the technical people, the IT, the engineers, the architects, those types of people that we work with. So from a technical perspective, we can have people that are what we would call owners. Owner meaning somebody that's going to actually implement the solution. They will own the responsibility of it. Very typically falls inside of an IT type function. They are the ones that have to implement this thing to make sure it works within the environment. Some of you mentioned earlier, security, networking, other people like that. That's what we mean by owners, because they have to sign off on, hey, am I going to be able to support this? Will it work in our environment? And then, of course, the implementers themselves that are going to be making sure that the training happens and that this works with the people that need it. These are the ones that will go out and they will start to check with the end users to make sure that this solution looks like something that will actually be able to work for them. I know I do a lot of work with healthcare solutions, and one of the big complaints, we have friends that are nurses, and a lot of times nurses say healthcare rolls out solutions that do no good for us as a nurse on the floor. And so it's important to find out from the technical stakeholders, how will these solutions be used in the field? And what is it that they're going to be actually doing with it to make sure it's successful? Because remember, our goal is successful customers, not just a sale. And then, of course, there's a very special type of technical stakeholder called technical decision maker. They are the one, in an analogous way to the business decision maker, who is going to sign off on the technical viability. The owners and implementers, in this case, are going to be influencing the technical decision maker so that we wind up with all of that influence going toward them so that they know that they've got something that's technically viable. Now, the other interesting thing I want to point out here with just these two sets of roles is, and then I'll stop for a minute, see if there's any questions or comments. One of the other important things about this is you're going to see is very often the business stakeholder, they're not technical by definition. So what they do is they will delegate to a technical role the responsibility of understanding the technical aspect of the solution. And therefore, the technical decision maker has a very important role of recommending, and we'll talk a lot more about this in a few minutes, recommending back to the business decision maker that this is technically viable, it's going to do what the users want, we can put it in our environment, and therefore we should, from our perspective, we're good to go. And then the business decision maker can validate whether it's going to achieve the outcomes that they want from a value perspective. So just looking in the chat real quick, if you have it. And by the way, Garrett, I'm not monitoring the Q&A per se, so maybe I don't see any there yet. So if you have anything come up in Q&A, let me know. I'm more looking at the chat. so the question came up is, from our experience, what is the ratio of sales situations or opportunities where teams does not properly understand the buying roles of the customer? I don't have an actual number, but I think it's a huge percent. Every time I go into a training situation, enablement situation, what I find is that sales people in particular, and I can speak to that because I'm a salesperson, I still am and I was, it's easy to default to what you're used to. And very often, since you're relying so much on your SE, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, as we've already said before, it's easy to get some kind of a technical contact. And so what I find as a default, and this isn't true for everybody, so I know a lot of you are not doing this, but just one thing to check yourself, as a default, it's easy for the AM to sort of migrate or gravitate toward these areas right here. And as a result, some of the top part gets missed. Where the top part or the business stakeholder often does get encountered is what somebody said before, and that is procurement. So let me just write this on the screen here real quick. Oop. So procurement, and that's a problem because now all we've got is some kind of technical proof that we're trying to put into procurement. And there's not anybody with stake in the game that's saying, hey, this is what I really want. I'm the relevant executive that's affected by it. So that's, again, another topic for a deeper discussion, but hopefully that gives you some insight that we all should check ourselves and be really, really brutally honest. I like to say we want to go for the ugly truth, not the beautiful lie. We could feel like we've got everything covered, but we don't always. And that's why qualification is so important. And I'll probably do another webinar at some point in the future on qualification, because there's many sales methodologies out there, and the really, really good ones like Sales Opportunity Snapshot that I support, it talks about who are the business decision makers, who are the technical decision makers, what is their level of influence, to check for that. Thanks for that. Any other questions or comments? I saw a raised hand there for a moment. I don't know if that hand went down again. If you've got a question or comment, you could put it in the chat. All right, so with that as the backdrop then, let's take a look at what the role of the sales rep and the SE is in the process. And I'm curious, based on what we've covered so far. So, and we touched on this a little bit earlier. So there's a little demarcation point in our discussion here in the chat. What is the role of the SE then in terms of this right here? All right, so I love what I'm seeing there in terms of some ideas of at the C level, focus on business value, middle level, active projects initiatives, engineer developers focus on speeds, feeds, features, performance. Absolutely. Specifically, what I'm looking for is, from your experience, what are the roles of the SE in this what we've discussed so far? Keep the AM honest, deliver a demo. And more than that, deliver a demo that meets the technical requirements while satisfying the business needs, right? Value selling through a demo, gathering requirements, determining technical fit, absolutely. Get into a proof of concept. Now, for each of you, that could be different. I've worked with companies where they want to go to a proof of concept because that is the way they win the deals. Others of you, you want to avoid a proof of concept because it just drags out the sales process. So proof of concept isn't the panacea that it always seems to be. Make sure that you understand the strategy overall of what the team's trying to do. Get the technical win and functional win, absolutely. SE, keep all these in mind, be the expert, tailor demo, client's pain, technical response, the good cop, demo with their needs in mind, absolutely. This is a very important part of it. Make sure we're not overselling or selling something that will never fly. All right, so keep all those in mind. And then AM role, let's see what some ideas here of, okay, the sales role then. What is the sales role here? What is the sales role? And if you're the salesperson, go ahead and put what your role is. If you're the SE, pre-sales or enablement or other, what is the role of the account manager then based on what we've talked about so far? And go out for lunch. And that's all kidding aside, that is an important part of it, right? The AM is oftentimes the one that has the time to develop the relationship. Unfortunately, the SEs don't always. Some of you do have that opportunity. Many of you don't, because it is very much being brought in as a key resource. I like to think of the SE as, like the surgeon, right? Brought in when everything is totally understood. Yet sometimes the surgeon does meet with the patient right up front, but it's about the diagnosis. And the AM is the one that's doing that relationship building and things like that. Definitely, okay, and somebody said relationship building, moving the deal along. In fact, the SE probably is more of the moving the deal along. The AM moves the deal along, and then as somebody put in here, closing the deal, managing the overall process, get the business win, the line of sight to sales timeline through procurement, absolutely. Understanding politics, decision makers, influencers, quarterback, strategize, negotiate, champion the sale, coach the buyers. Yes, this is a big part of it, is how we help them with what they're doing, build trust, bring the right stakeholders in, know the competitors, negotiate the deal. Awesome. So it's easy sometimes to, as a SE or pre-sales, to think, oh, the sales rep just sits back and lines the meetings up and gets me involved. Well, if that's what you're thinking, then there's a lot that can be improved there, right? And from an account manager perspective, oftentimes it's thought that I'm doing all this work, and then the SE comes in, and I don't know why they don't just, do what I say, because I've done all this work. So I think there's, opportunity for both of us to work toward the middle and see each other's position better, and then leverage it so that we're all better off in the process. So I also see in here qualifying, absolutely. Discovery, knowing when to walk away. That's really good insight as well. When is there not a deal here? Being respectful enough to say, you know what, if it's not for you, that's fine, and then move on. That's probably one of the hardest things that I know that as an account manager that I've done, is how do I know when to say that it's enough? And you know what? Sometimes as an account manager, when we say, doesn't look like there's a fit here, and we start to walk away, or when the customer is being too pushy and expects too much, and we start to walk away, they will actually sometimes come back to us and say, we really want to work with you. And they oftentimes respect that if we walk away. So that is a big part of the job. All right. So with that in mind, what I want to talk about now is the process, and really thinking about the process. And this is something that we talk about in a different way in each of the workshops that I do, but I just want to put together the whole picture for you here in total. And then we'll talk about specifically what are the things that each of us in our own role can do to make this process better. And I do think that this is unique because even in the SE role, it's often taught about in terms of the demo or doing discovery or some of these pieces, which are all very important tactical parts of it. Let's look at overall what's going on for the strategy. And from an account manager perspective, the strategy of not just where your particular role is, because this is BDR or CSR at the very beginning, it's hard to visualize the end, but that's important because we all want to know where is this going to, starting with the end in mind, right? And also for anybody that's more at the front end of the process, or if you're an SE that's more in a commercial environment where you're just doing demo after demo after demo, eventually in your career, you can move into the more high touch. And for CSRs and BDRs, the goal would be to move into those AM and AE roles where you're more engaged with the customer. So it's important from a career perspective to know the overall process, but also from a sales opportunity perspective. So for any given sales opportunity, here's a pretty typical generic sales process. What we've got at the beginning is identifying the opportunity, qualifying it, and qualifying out as the case may be, so that we're not chasing things that are not well qualified. The discovery, so deeper dive. And by the way, discovery does start in qualification, because whatever we learn in qualification should and can be the basis for additional discovery. So don't miss out on that. There's a lot of things we understand in qualification, such as, is this a real deal? Do they have a real business need? Do they have the ability to fund the project? Do they see viability in our solution? All of these things are part of and add to discovery as we continue to move through the process. Then we put together a solution only based on all of this. So here's a little, road marker, a stop sign in the middle of the road. If you feel like as an SE you are delivering solutions without understanding discovery, I would call a timeout. If you feel like as an AM, you're asking somebody that's doing something without sharing with them what you've discovered and what the context is, that's something that we should think about improving, because we cannot and should not do solutions without doing the discovery. Then purchase and negotiate. Little caveat here, negotiate really begins at hello. And again, that's a topic for another day. Have a whole workshop on that. But the negotiation is all about what are different interests? What is the customer really trying to do? What are they trying to get out of this? And then at the end, it's really confirming that we've met what their interests are. Certainly purchasing, and then purchasing gets involved here. Then deploying it, and this is where if you're a CSM type role, customer success manager type role, that can get involved, and then measure results so that we can generate repeat customers, or the customer we have can expand where they're at. Now that's the buying process, or excuse me, the selling process. From the buyer's perspective, this is what's going on. And Garen has a lot of this in his book, by the way, as well, so you can check that out further, the book about selling is hard and buying is harder. The selling process is where we usually live. The buying process is what we should really be thinking about. So they go through some planning, impact analysis, they explore options. Very often, this is where they get us involved, is through an RFP or an RFQ. The goal would be to get involved as early as possible so that we can influence their decision-making, their exploration, educate them about what it is that are the possibilities. Then they evaluate the options through either POC or whatever. Our goal would be to minimize that so that they can clearly see the value and we eliminate the competitors or alternatives. Then they decide and negotiate, then they implement, and then they measure results, with the goal being is that we have a happy, satisfied customer. So let's take a look at, and by the way, in one of the sales workshops I do for account managers, I ask them to point to this process before I discuss it. I say, where do you usually get involved with this process? And you know what I find 99, well, maybe 95% of the time, what they point to is something on this part of the chart. I display both parts. I display the buyer part and I display the sales part. But remarkably, they almost always click on or show their involvement on the sales part. And I point out that might tell us something, is that we are thinking from a sales perspective, and we're thinking from a perspective of how do we move the sales forward. As we know, the best way to move the sales forward is to move the buying process forward. So that might be another key takeaway here in terms of what it is that you are trying to help them do. So yes, so Garrett, I see that there's a couple questions. Is there questions that would be relevant to what we're talking about here, or otherwise we can save them for the end?
Yeah, one that just came in this last section says, should the SE be in discoveries or should the account manager be able to gather enough information for a solution presentation later on?
Yeah, this will depend on the deal size, the nature of the customer, and other things like that. The one thing for sure is that the SE should not be involved unless it's well qualified. So SE should not get involved with qualification. That demarcation point would be important. As far as discovery, depending on the nature of the product and the solution, the sales rep may be able to find out enough to give everything that's needed for the SE to do a technical proof demo, but that means that the SE has to confirm they have everything they need. So if you're wondering from an AM perspective, should you pull your SE in earlier, ask them if they have everything they need to show that solution or that proof point. If you know, from a business perspective, I think the AM is doing that discovery. However, that should be shared with the SE. And then clearly at some point, there's absolutely a technical discovery portion that happens where the SE needs to find out what the technical requirements are. So again, whether that comes directly from the customer by way of meetings or whether that comes from the AM, there is a technical aspect to it. So we always got to think about the business aspect and the technical aspect of when they get involved. And I think somebody else in the chat mentioned, is there an internal prep call? And yes, that's what we're talking about here. Communication is going to be one of the main themes here, and the idea about working seamlessly. Was there another quick one for now, or do you want to save it for later?
We'll save it for the end. We have one more.
Okay, great, excellent. And again, I'm seeing a lot of questions, really good questions in the chat about specifics like, what about discovery demos? We can get to those on future calls. I'm laying the groundwork here for the overall engagement. But discovery demos are really great. In Great Demo, we call it vision generation. And you can check out the greatdemo.com page for tons of articles about vision generation, where it is used, where we show experience from others in order to drive discovery. But be careful, because all SEs should not be engaged with that necessarily. It depends on what your strategy is from a sales team perspective. So this is why it's important to talk it out and make sure that everybody's on the same page. Now, based on what we've talked about so far, let me put this whole picture together. And this is going to wind up with a little bit of an eye chart, but for all of you who are live here or watching the recording, you will see this develop as we go, and it will be very clear what we're talking about. Putting this all together then, with that process in mind, the buying and the selling process, let's take a look at all the roles and at a high level, who's doing what. So first of all, in terms of level of involvement, the business stakeholders typically are involved a lot at the beginning, because it's about strategy and about making sure that the business vision is achieved and addressing business issues. And then they drop off near the middle, because this is, as we'll see in a moment, going to be handed off and delegated to the technical decision makers or stakeholders. And then they get involved at the end again, because they want to make sure that the value that they promised, that they've been promised or that they're expecting, has actually been realized. So they will be involved again at the end. The technical stakeholder, therefore, is not that involved necessarily up front. They certainly could be, and this is very general. All of the things we're covering today are in a way like a very generalized, presentation. There's going to be fine tuning and exceptions or additional refinements to all of this. And one of the things is, generally speaking, technical stakeholders would get involved at the point where they start to explore options. They could or should be involved here. Several IT departments have now promoted themselves to the point where they are members of the board. So there's very much some IT board members, a CIO that is a member of the board, actually. I know Toyota did this many years ago, so that they could be involved with the business decision making. But generally speaking, technical is going to be primarily involved in this area, and then of course through implementation and measurement. What they're focused on here, features and functions of what it is the requirements are. And then what they're focused on here is the implementation to make sure that it goes successfully. And of course, they should be communicated back and forth, as I talked about earlier. The technical decision maker confirms to the business decision maker that the solution meets the needs and provides the value that they actually want. Now let's lay in the sales roles here. So here is a schematic, and again, this is very much high-level schematic of what the account manager involvement would look like. Very heavily involved at the beginning, dropping off slightly, but certainly not going away by any means as we go through the technical aspect, and then again being involved at the end here. What is the AM doing during this? At the beginning, it's qualifying and discovery, and primarily business discovery, or to the extent possible technical where it makes sense. What they're doing in the middle is influencing driving. Many of you said that earlier, as far as helping the deal move along and building up the relationships and all that as we go through, making sure that the SE has what they need in order to show the proper technical proofs and get the validation that the solution meets the needs. And then at the end, it's about the business close. So that includes all the gory things about, purchasing and everything else, and getting the business stakeholders to influence purchasing, and then closing off and generating the purchase order. Now, I kind of show the AM role stopping here, but depending on what role you have, you may be in a sales role such as customer success manager, which absolutely continues on here. And that's a very specialized role, because you're not only helping to realize the value, you are also looking for new opportunities, which would then feed back into the beginning of this process. So I'm right now focusing, at least for today, mainly on the AM and SE role through and including the implementation, but with all of us having the goal of customer success in mind. What does the SE involvement look like, therefore? The SE involvement, similar to the technical stakeholder, might be this. Now, it's quite possible, depending if you're an account or a major SE, you could be involved more upfront here. You may be more one-on-one with your account manager. If you're more of a commercial SE, where you are doing a lot of different deals, or you're an inside SE, then you may be brought in more tactically on a case-by-case basis. What is the SE doing during this part? It's technical proof. It's all about the proofs. And what is the SE responsible for? It's technical close here at the end. So let me put this all together and pause for a moment. And then I want to conclude with what is it that how can we leverage each other through this process? So the SE's role, and I'll start with the SE's role because it's interesting to me. SEs are called pre-sales, which implies they're there before the sale, but isn't the salesperson before the sale too? But I think the reason why it's called pre-sales is it's a prerequisite to the sale. We can't have a sale without the SE role. We can't have a sale without technical closure, right? That's what pre-sales really means. So the primary responsibility of the SE, and this came from a workshop that I developed way back in 2005 called Top SE. Some of you may be familiar with that. And I've changed this since then, is the primary role is to achieve technical closure by confirming the technical decision maker. Remember, there was that special technical stakeholder role, has done the following. They validate that the solution meets their needs. Now, this is where a lot of companies stop. This is where a lot of sales processes stop, is technical win. It goes on from there because we still could be against a bunch of different competition, right? So we also, as an SE, need to make sure that they select our solution at the exclusion of the alternatives, which means not just the competition, but even do nothing. And if I was to ask right now, I'm sure all the hands would go up that do nothing is a big competitor. That's not even enough though, because there's another important part. Remember, we talked about the business decision maker delegating to technical. So we also, as SEs, have the responsibility with technical close to make sure that the technical decision maker, whoever is responsible for that, recommends or articulates the value of the solution to the business decision maker. So this closes that loop. And as an SE, this is pretty much the end of our responsibility in most cases. We are not responsible for making the deal go farther, but if we have done this, the odds of increasing the win rate go up. And so AMs, this is something you want to equip your SEs to be able to do better. From the AM role, there's an analogy here of the business decision maker seeing the value of the solution in addressing their business needs, and that they've selected the solution at the exclusion of other business alternatives. So business decision makers can decide between our stuff or putting in a parking lot or having a new employee incentive plan, right? We are competing against other internal projects that are going on. And they sponsor our solution and the financial benefit to the approver so that they know what the benefit, the ROI, and the value is going to be. So in conclusion here, as we begin to wrap this up, the roles in the selling process look like this. And if I represent the overall coverage from business focus kind of at a higher level, which is a higher level in the organization, to a technical level that's a lower level in the organization, sales fully owns and is responsible for the account opportunity strategy and deep understanding of the business needs. So that's a solid line. They need a very, very strong working relationship with the business stakeholders, especially the BDM, but also the TDM. So it's not strictly just the role of pre-sales or SEs to do that. And the value of the solutions. And then what also should be known, but notice it starts to drop off in importance and focus, is the knowledge of the solutions, overall knowledge. And again, depending on your situation, this may vary, it may shift a little bit, but in general, this is what the responsibilities are. From the SE perspective, it's owning that deep technical knowledge. It's features, functions, and benefits, as we like to say in mastering technical sales FAB, right? Feature, advantage, and benefits. And also having the relationship with key technical stakeholders, especially the TDM, knowing the value of the solutions. So notice the overlap here. This is a very important part of the whole picture. And then finally, an understanding of the business stakeholders. They don't necessarily always have the relationship with them. So, and we'll make these slides available. You'll see it in the replay. I'll have my contact information at the end if you want to send a note, and I can send you a copy of these slides. So the advice for sales and AMs, proper discovery, qualification. That's where it starts with this qualification. Then engage the SE as appropriate. Divide and conquer, engaging the SEs in a way that maximizes their trust. You know, SEs come in with trust, AMs need to gain it. So use that to divide and conquer in a positive way. Help the SEs with what questions they could ask, ways they can show value, ways you can work together. And let your SE know the customer situation when requesting help, like the business needs, the value desired, and the competitive landscape. So this is all advice for the sales and AMs. And these are the things we often teach in our SE trainings that they say, oh, my salesperson needs to know this too. Advice for pre-sales and SEs, ask your sales counterpart for the information, including qualification information. I think it's very valuable to find out what is it that made them think that this deal is worth pursuing. Focus on elements that optimize your interactions and move the deal forward. You're not responsible for closing it, but definitely moving it forward. What are the business issues? What's the value expected? What's the driving reason for change? In Great Demo, we have something called the situation slide, and these are 3 of the key components. In Mastering Technical Sales, we also talk about this. And in Sales Opportunity Snapshot, these are 3 of the key areas of business qualification to make sure we should pursue the deal. So this is the stuff the SEs need. Ask for it. Maybe your AM has it and they've just never given it to you before. And then use a help me help you approach with the sales team. For the sales team overall, working together, connecting the technical solutions to the business value, focus on and help the buyer understand the risk of do nothing. What's that look like compared to the risk of moving forward? Total cost of ownership, working together top down, bottom up, collaborating on strategy and tactics. So as you can see, you couldn't have understood all of what these are unless we went through that roles, the buying process, and what each of us are doing. So in conclusion, and then we've got a few minutes for some questions, and I'll be glad to stay over. When AMs and SEs work together for more seamless sales, we'll be able to help the buyer through the process, move it from a push where we're pushing to where they're pulling. That's ideal, right? And as a team, we get them to pull as an SE, we get them to pull as the AM. So now we're getting the information we need. Optimize their interactions for the buyer and for us as a sales team, make it more efficient for everybody because nobody has extra time. And then increase the win rate so we turn it from a sell into a buy. And that's really what the goal overall is. So let me go ahead and we'll entertain those final thoughts and comments. Here's my contact information. If you'd like to reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn. And thank you so much, Garrett, for the opportunity. And thank you, everybody, for all your comments. I'm going to look back through these after the session and take them into consideration. We'll make the presentation available to you as well. So
thank you,
what
Art.
final questions do we have here?
Yeah, one here says, what ways have you found to overcome technical stakeholders who become blockers because they don't understand their organization's technical needs, the technical abilities of the solution you're presenting, or in general aren't qualified for the role?
Yeah, so I would do a little bit of a help me help you with wouldn't it be helpful for you to know a little more about what's going on here, and can we go together to find that out? Will they sponsor maybe me to help them find that out? Because if they're doing something in a vacuum, it's not going to be as successful. So just like we need to know the hierarchy of needs, they should also know that.
Awesome. Thanks, Art. And then one last question here from Doug says, what is your opinion on having a hybrid role or skill set whereby the SE and AM role is one individual, particularly for low ACV deals?
So I have some experience with that because I was in a SE role. It was a hybrid role where I covered the whole process and I was allowed to become the account manager. I've been working with 2 key accounts for 2 years in that hybrid role. And then I was given the opportunity to become the account manager for those 2 key accounts. When I came in on Monday and introduced myself as the account manager, they stopped believing 1/3 of what I said. Honestly, I'm not kidding. I'm like, I'm the same person that was here Friday. And they said, no, now you have a quota. So I think there may be situations where it could work in highly transactional deals, or where the qualification is simpler or the discovery is simpler, but I would be careful about it. The more complex and the bigger the deals become, I think a focus on the business needs and a focus on the technical needs is needed. But what we all really need, everybody, is to make it seamless and work together as a team and have a healthy overlap in the middle. FAB, by the way, was feature, advantage, and benefit, somebody asked. So thank you, everybody. Really, really appreciate the opportunity. Hopefully this got you thinking, and we'll come back with additional detail in these, because as I was telling Garrett when we started, the hardest thing was to boil this down into a 1-hour session. I'm writing a book on this in terms of seamless sales, but hopefully I'll be invited back and we can explore more of these topics in more detail. Thanks,
Definitely.
Garrett. Thanks, Consensus.
Thank you again, Art. We'll get this recording out to everyone who attended. Thank you all for coming. Again, take the survey at the end of this if you have the chance. And if you have any questions about demo automation as a whole, we really appreciate it. Thank you all. Have a good one.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.